conversation on the art of storytelling through music with musician and educator Francisco Dean.
Francisco, tell us about your true feelings about what impact did this have on both you and the children as you completed this compilation?
For me, being an outsider to Jewish culture, but having a deep appreciation for it from, back when I was, a kid and visited Auschwitz, it was just very validating that it was a lot of hard work. There were times I didn't know if I would get this created on time. There were times I wasn't sure if I was doing it justice. There were times I wasn't sure if things were coming together. And so when all of that really became interwoven through the storyline, that for me gave me a lot of peace, because it wasn't really me telling the story. It was the Jewish people telling the story.
Yes,
I was just kind of compiling things together and organizing it in a way that could kind of open the door for them to just have their voice. So for me as an outsider, there are still ripples of that appreciation that I have. The students, I'm very encouraged to hear their stories. As a mother-daughter couple, Marianne Zimmel is one of the German teachers at Lab, and her daughter was actually a senior at the school, and they both were a part of this project. Rachel, the daughter, she read some of the poetry. Marianne portrayed Rennie Walhas, the mother who writes the letter farewell to her family when she learns she and her son are going to be sent to Auschwitz. And
wow,
having them be a part of this project and coaching them to really kind of draw as much emotion as I possibly could from them, having them kind of look back and just reflect on what that's done for them, as having a sense of pride for who they are and for what their ancestors have experienced. I couldn't have gone into this project hoping for that. And so to get, accolades in that regard as a teacher who, I think anything that we do, whether it's math or history or English or science, we want to have an impact. We're trying to tell these students about things that matter in our society and our world, but not just from a bullet point factual checklist. We're hoping that this is a living, breathing entity that becomes part of who they are. And I think that was probably the biggest reward that I could have gotten from this, was having learned of the impact that it did have on the kids.
Francisco, if I can just follow up with one, Julel, this is so exciting and so interesting. I want to know if you have considered actually approaching the museum in Washington, D.C. for the Holocaust, because we visited there. And this would be a great artifact to have in that facility, because there's nothing that deals with this type of genre in there that we saw.
Definitely.
I actually had a chance to visit the DC Museum myself about 15 years ago. And so I know what you're talking about in terms of that impact. That's a monumental place to be in. It definitely provokes profound thought. I've been asked by several people that question: have I approached the museum? I started local here with Skokie. They had an Anne Frank presentation that spring, the same year that we premiered the piece. And so they had us come down as guests, and we did a live performance, which was very well received. I hadn't thought about the impact of sharing that until other people like yourself have brought that up. And so I plan on reaching out to them. And, this to me is just a work that I want to freely share to anybody who is interested. whether that just be you wanted a recording of the performance, do you want a copy of the music so you could actually see the composition on paper. We did a pretty in-depth making of featurette so that we showed how this piece was, born and kind of, manifested. Any and all of those materials, I would be more than willing to share with anybody who I thought might have benefit from it.
You're wishing in the presence of genius.
I know. And we can say, remember when he was on That World? I know. Francisco, one of the things that I want to talk about too, I want you to tell the story to our audience about how there was a letter that was used in the artifact and how it had an impact on a particular audience member.
Sure.
Because I'm going to let you tell that.
So again, in browsing the archives of Skokie's museum and looking for different pieces of artifacts we might use, one of them that Emily showed me was a letter, a typed out letter written by a woman named Rennie Valhaus. And this is a farewell letter to her family because she's just learned that she and her son Alfred are about to be sent to Auschwitz. She knows she's going to die. She knows her son's going to die. This is going to be the last time that she has any kind of way to say goodbye to her family and loved ones. And so there was that letter, but then there just also happened to be a typewriter, not the typewriter, but a typewriter from the Holocaust. And so we sampled typewriter strikes. The typewriter itself was no longer functioning, but we're able to simulate typewriter strikes. And so that part of the piece that you're referring to is actually the transition from the first movement into the second movement. So, Bird Song, where we're talking about a peaceful, calmful time. And it's almost as if when you are reading this letter, you're realizing that the Holocaust is now a thing. So it's the bridge that goes into the darkness of the second movement. Wow. Rennie was a German Jew, and so the letter was written in German. Marianne Zimmel, my great good friend and colleague at the lab school, I recruited her to read both the German letter and an English translation that we kind of wordsmith together. So in that part of the piece, various parts of the German or English translation kind of come in and out of focus. You can kind of hear it evolve. It's a pretty visceral part of the piece. It's the most visceral part. It gets really unapologetic about what's about to happen. And so we fast forward to the actual assembly that the JSA puts on. There's always a keynote speaker that is brought in as a guest. And in this case, he was a Holocaust survivor. His parents got him out when he was very young. I don't believe they made it, but they were able to get him out. And so he's telling this story about, his journey out of danger. Towards the end of the program, we performed this piece. And then after the assembly was over, he came over to say hello to the students and I and just introduce himself and congratulate the kids on a job well done. But then what he said after that is something that no one could have ever predicted or expected. He revealed to us that Rennie Valhaus was in fact his aunt.
Whoa!
And I don't mean third, fourth generation removed one. Like his mother's sister was Rennie Valhaus. And, when you think about all of the millions of people that have ties to that horrific event, the odds that we would choose out of thousands of pieces in that archive, a letter that was written by a person that could have just been, we've had keynote speakers for that assembly, since its inception. Mm-hmm. No one, the people choosing the keynote speaker didn't know what we were writing. They didn't even know what our piece was. So no one could have known any of that. And to have all of those planets align when he revealed that, the kids lost it. They really broke down.
I'm sure they did.
Because it just tied everything home. You know, they were already so invested in the preparing of the piece, but then to really, and I can't even imagine being in the audience, hearing a musical performance, and then a portion of that is directly related to a close relative of mine in real time. I just can't even fathom what that would have been like for him. So I was so grateful that he shared that with us. It really tied the impact that much deeper, and never going to forget that.
So one last thing, I know time is running short, but I would like for you to talk about your guest appearances for Chicago house music labels, such as S&S Records and True Musica.
Yeah, all of that can be tied into my good friend Brian Boncher. I met Brian actually while I was in trade school learning this whole music technology stuff, how to teach these kinds of classes, how to operate that software and create, beats and whatnot, produce. At the time, the school was called Music Industry Workshop, and Brian was one of the instructors. Very successful in his own right. He is an incredibly talented and well-established house music producer in the Chicago area.
I'm sorry, I love some house music. Look, you're taking me back. I'm not going to tell my age, but you're taking me back, okay?
Yes,
okay,
indeed.
Go ahead, Francisco.
And, he was one of the people that, again, was really responsible for kind of helping guide me and just learning all of this stuff. But then later on, after the fact, we still kept our connection to this day. He comes and, lectures for my students. He guest performs. And so, that was just a project of his. He was doing a track and he wanted some trumpet. And so, frequently he'll have an idea. He'll send me some section of the song. I'll lay down trumpet stuff and send that back to him. And then he works his magic and produces all that stuff together. So that's just been fun and a really creative way for us to collaborate and make music together.
Joe, I told you greatness.
Yes.
Joe.
Francisco, I know we're going to have you back.
Yes.
This has been such a wonderful conversation. Dino and I are always encouraging, with this podcast, that if folks have a voice, to make sure that they speak out. But instead of us doing our closing tag and closing out, first of all, I want to know how folks can reach you, but I want you to close out our show and do an introduction of the digital project. Digital Symphony is what I've been calling it. And to let our viewers actually hear the masterpiece that you and your students have created. So again, before we close out, how can folks get in contact with you? And then I'm going to give it to you to close out the show.
Sure. Probably school is the easiest way. I'm on the faculty at the University of Chicago Lab School. That's a great way to find me and reach out. I also have a little presence on Facebook. You can find me there as well. Those are probably the easiest ways to reach me, and happy to connect with anybody at any time.
All right. Well, you all heard it first here. And again, we want to thank our guests. I'm your host, Jewel L.
And I'm your host, Dino.
And we're going to have our very special guest, Francisco Dean, close us out with an introduction of his special project that he did using the Holocaust artifacts. Francisco Dean, it's on you. Close us out.
So, Frilingdik Umbazigt, which translates to as the spring unconquered, takes its title from the admiration of those who have overcome oppression with steadfast resolve and continue to press forward. The piece is in 3 continuous movements, each movement interpreted through poems written by children who were prisoners at the Terezin concentration camp, The first Bird Song, written anonymously, marks the time before the Holocaust. Fear, written by Eva Pikova, gives a sobering account of the Holocaust itself through her eyes. And I Am a Jew, written by Front Boss, stands as a call to defiance against tyranny. Each movement also borrows musical themes that have become staples in the Jewish culture. At its core, the piece is exploration of sound design, taking frequencies in one form and transforming them into different sounds altogether. Every instrument heard was created from field recordings from artifacts from the Holocaust. Overall, the piece became so much more than any of us could have imagined, providing lessons, connections, and appreciation that will last a lifetime. Field recordings from 44 artifacts were collected. 18 were ultimately used to create 24 different instrument sounds. So every instrument sound you hear is coming from an artifact of the Holocaust, but every word you hear is coming from the people who lived it.
Wow.
And now I hope you enjoy Frilingdik Umbazigt as the Spring Unconquered.
Bird song. Bird song. He doesn't know the world at all. Who stays in his nest and doesn't go out.
He doesn't know what birds know best, nor what I want to sing about. That the world is full of loveliness.
When dewdrops sparkle in the grass, and earth's aflood with morning light.
A blackbird sings upon a bush to greet the dawning after night. Then I know how fine it is to live.
Hey, try to open up your heart to beauty. Go to the woods someday and weave a wreath of memory there. Then, if the tears obscure your way, you'll know how wonderful it is to be alive.
Meine innigst Geliebten, my dearest loved ones, it is with great difficulty that I write you this farewell letter. Aber wenn ihr If you are receiving this letter, it means I could not say goodbye to you in person. Unser Schicksal ist Our fate is hopeless. Ich hatte geglaubt. I had thought Alfred and I would see you again. But our fate has been decided. Aber versucht doch, uns aufzufinden. Do try to find us. Perhaps God is watching over us. Vergesst uns nicht. Don't forget us. Bis zur letzten. I will think of you until my final hour. Ich kusse euch innig. I send you my deepest embrace, and I continue to love you until my end. To love you until my end. My deepest embrace, and I continue to love you.
Brother Francisco Dean.
Thank you, Francisco.
In Washington, D.C., when the Holocaust Museum wants you to come and present, we would love to accompany you.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Listen, I appreciate what you all are doing with this podcast. I've never heard of a theme as unique as this that really ties in a platform for people who are out there creating for a purpose to really come in and gather and fellowship. And I've gotten to know your website. I'm honored to be invited to be a guest. It's great to meet you all. You're just good people. Thank you so much for having me be a part of your show.
Greatness, Joel L. Great.
I know.
Yes.
Francisco Dean, thank you so much. Thank you so much for all that you do. And please come back to Speak Out World any time that you want to have a platform to connect music and activism and tell us what you're doing. You are welcome here. So
Yes, indeed. Thank you all.
All right.
thank you.
Let's go.
All right.
All right.